guys, it's Faye from Solar Flow, and I am back with a new video. Today's topic is a deep dive behind the veil energy read on a man named Scott Peterson, who was found guilty of killing his 8-month pregnant wife, a woman named Lacey Peterson, as well as their unborn son, who was to be named Connor. So if this sounds good to you, please stick around, and if not, I will catch you at another video. Now, for anybody that is new here, I'm going to ask for a favor, which is to say, if you've seen a couple of my videos and you know what we explore, which is peeling back the three-dimensional layer and exploring what is playing out on a soul, spiritual, or energetic component, I invite you to please subscribe. We are working diligently here to try to grow this station to reach 1,000 subs, because at that time I will be hosting a lot of raffles and giveaways for readings and things like that. And if you are here, you will get to be part of the fun as well. However, if that's not your jam, that's cool. I'm glad that you're here and you're watching this video. I would ask for you to please like or even leave a comment on this video, because all of those things do help the channel grow as well. Last bit of housekeeping before we get into it, which is to say, if you're new here, or even if you're not, I'm just going to remind you, I do read from my notebook. And the reason for that is that first and foremost, a lot of information tends to come in. And I believe in this video about 6 or 7 pages of information came in. And I don't want to leave anything out. And the reason I don't want to leave anything out is because when I'm channeling somebody's energy, this is not information that is mine to take liberties with. This is something that they shared with me. So it's not for me to leave out or to paraphrase or to put things in that aren't there. So I really do try to stick to the script as much as I possibly can, so that I am sticking as close to what was the information that was shared with me. Okay, now let's get into it. So for anybody that is maybe from another country and you're not familiar with this case, or maybe you were just not paying attention to the news when this had happened, this was a husband and wife, Scott Peterson and Laci Peterson, and Lacey had gone missing on December 24th, 2002. So Christmas Eve day. And at the time that Lacey had gone missing, Scott had reported to the police that he had gone fishing, but he had also told neighbors that he had gone golfing. So a little bit of an interesting discrepancy there. Now, he also did not report to the police that Lacey was missing. It was actually his mother that reported, it was her mother that reported to the police that Lacey was missing. And there was another of a couple of things that were kind of like interesting and notable, one could say, that had played out over the next few days as well. Which is that 2 days later, after the disappearance of Lacey Peterson, there was a candlelight vigil held in her honor, and Scott did not go. Additionally, 2 days later, Scott had added 2 pornography channels to the paid subscription services on his TV. When the police had also spoken to them, they were struck by how disinterested he almost seemed in their investigation. He did not ask the police for their business card. He didn't ask how he could follow up with them. He didn't ask what policing methodologies or techniques were they going to be employing so that they could try to find what had happened to Lacey. So they were completely struck by his lack of interest in the case. Now, what had also come out a number of months later was that Scott was at the time having an extramarital affair with a woman named Amber Fry, and that Scott had not even said anything to Amber about like his wife being missing or anything like that. He was just carrying on like it was business as usual. And Amber had actually discovered that it was his wife that was missing through the tabloids and through the media coverage. At that time, she started to actually work with the police to see if she could acquire any information to hand over to them. Now, so Lacey had disappeared on April 24th, 2002, and the fetus of the child, who was going to be named Connor at his birth, was discovered on April 13th, 2003. His body the fetus had washed up in the bay. They lived in Northern California, and there was a bay that actually connected to the Pacific Ocean nearby. Now, the following day, on April 14th, part of Lacey was washed up as well. Now, the way that this video is going to be formatted is we're going to first talk about the energy of Scott Peterson, because it's his energy that chose to come in and came in first and strongest. Then we're going to be exploring the soul, spiritual, and energetic component. And this next thing that I'm going to share is actually going to connect with that information, which is there is a term for this kind of a crime. And while it's not going to make a lot of sense now, it will make sense later on in the video. So I'm going to share with you what it is. So filicide is the crime of killing a fetus. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly because it has a funky spelling, but it's, I believe, uricide, UXURICIDE. Uricide, or however it's actually pronounced, is the crime of a woman killing her husband. Familicide is where a husband kills his wife and kills his born children. So just put a pin in this. We're going to come back to this later on. You will see why it connects when we get into the soul aspect. Okay? So let's dive in to Scott Peterson's energy now. So at the time that I had connected to Scott's energy, he had first shared with me that he felt like he was drowning. And the more and more pregnant Lacey became, the more submerged he felt like he was drowning underwater. And that he feared with the eventual birth of his son Connor, it would lead to the death of he himself. He felt like he was drowning in his life. Let's explore why. Now, he had shared with me that he did not love Lacey, which sounds really bad. So he went on to clarify and to say, at least not the way that she loved him or the baby, his words. But it's more that he loved the idea of Lacey. She was nice, normal, and would give him a nice sort of life. But the problem is that Scott Peterson as a person was fundamentally very prone to boredom. So while he went into it having good intentions, it soon became evident to him that him and Lacey were very fundamentally different. She was content to have a nice, normal life. And while he, on the other hand, kind of aspired to be that way. He aspired to have a nice, normal kind of a life. And from the outside, he had those things. He had a house, a wife, and a baby on the way. And while he knew it was good for him and that he should be happy and content, he wasn't. And he wasn't because of the boredom that he was so prone to. He therefore felt like he was playing dress up in his life and that it wasn't really him. Because these were not really things that he wanted. What he wanted was excitement. And why he wanted excitement was because he felt dead and empty inside. His energy, his words, he had shared this with me. He felt dead and empty inside, and he needed a lot more to feel a semblance of emotions. Not to say that the emotions he did feel were particularly grand, but whatever they were, it took a lot to get them going. Hence the boredom. So the way that it was kind of shown to me is, for anybody that has gone camping, you'll understand this. Or even if you haven't gone camping, I'll explain it in a way that will make sense, which is when you first get to the campsite, there's a lot of preparation that goes into building a fire, right? You have to gather all of the tinder and all of the material. You have to gather rocks so you can line the area that you're going to be building your fire in so it doesn't spread and become a massive forest fire. So there's a lot of initial preparation that goes into it. And then even once you start it and you light it, it takes a while until it really, really gets going. Now imagine that versus a couple of hours later, you have your fire, it's established, it's already burning. To keep it going involves a lot less effort. You can literally just take the timber that you've already gathered and just continue to add it to the fire. So it was shown to me very much this way with Scott and the way that he functioned on an emotional or energetic level, because he's saying he didn't really feel a lot of emotions. It took a lot to get his emotions going. So he was prone, therefore, to boredom. It's like, imagine you take a 5-year-old to the campsite and they can't wait to do the actual camping part of it, but they are not so excited about all of the preparation, right? They don't want to know that you went to Dick's Sporting Goods and how you had to buy a tent and how you had to buy sleeping bags and how you have to gather all of the food and you have to have all of the supplies and all of the materials. No, they just want to get to the campground and they want to be doing the camping. So Scott is very much this way. He just wanted the exciting part of life. He didn't really want all of the preparations that go into the so-called exciting parts of life, because it took so much to get him going energetically. So it's like, just come to me when the campsite is prepared. I don't want to be part of it until then. So hence the boredom. Now, he had also shared that he would have been better suited to be a sniper or a military man or someone who suited up and had iron insides, someone that did important things. But he had always felt like he was at war within himself, and that he was also lost to himself. Therefore, he kept himself entertained with his little side dalliances. And the little side dalliances were the extramarital affairs that he was having, because there was more than one. But with the impending birth of their child, he was starting to realize just how much his life was going to change, and he wasn't down for it. Now, he had actually thought about divorcing Lacey, but he realized he would be perceived to be the worst guy in the world for leaving his then pregnant wife. And he just couldn't do that. And so this is basically somebody that is very image conscious, right? He knew he would be perceived to be the worst guy in the world, and he just did not want his image to take that kind of a hit. He wasn't going to do it. And then he had also added, almost as an afterthought, that Lacey was perfectly nice, if a little boring. So leaving her alone to raise a kid didn't seem fair to her either. Now, it was at this time when he had shared this that I kind of like mentally was activated by this, and I called bullshit. Because here's why. It's one thing if you're image conscious and you don't want to be perceived as a bad guy. But then to be so image conscious that you won't leave your pregnant wife, and then 10 seconds later to also share, but she was also really nice and I wasn't going to do that to her, they're kind of incongruent. So I was mentally activated by this, and here's kind of the way that energy works, which is there's no boundaries and there's no border, because it's energy. It's not like, for example, if you're talking to a friend and you're saying things, and then based on the things that you're saying, you're observing your friend's facial expressions, or you're observing their eyes, and you're kind of like, you're seeing the way that the information is resonating or not resonating with them. Maybe then you'll stop talking, or maybe then you'll say, well, it seems like you have something you want to say about it. Can you share with me what it is? Because we cannot read minds, because we have bodies, we have boundaries. It doesn't work that way with energy. So when energy is interacting with energy, it's simultaneous. There's no boundaries, there's no borders. Therefore, when I am mentally activated with a thought, Scott is picking up on it in real time, and he's answering it through mental telepathy. So while I was thinking this, and my mind was kind of like being activated, and I was like, well, I call bullshit because these two things seem to be completely incongruent with one another, he had actually wanted me to see things from his point of view. Because as he had shared earlier on, he was saying that he always felt like he was at war within himself. And he wanted to expand on that to allow me to see how he could be having these two incongruent beliefs playing out simultaneously. And this is what he had shared with me. He wanted me to understand how it felt to be him, which was the knowingness that he was somehow different. He knew fundamentally that he was different than other people. And he looked at people like they were equal parts, abhorrent bores with their meaningless little lives, as well as a necessity to hide behind for them to give the appearance of him being the same as them. So he, in equal parts, despised people because they were abhorrent bores, in his opinion, and they had meaningless little lives. So he despised them, but he equal parts envied them. And he envied them because they didn't have to appear to be normal. They just fit in with everybody else, but he didn't. So he had to hide openly, if you will, among the people that were around him. But here's the thing. He hated them. He despised them. He hated that he needed them to appear to be normal. So he always felt at odds within himself, and he always felt at odds around other people. So even though he with equal parts despised and envied people, he mostly decided he had to try to be the same as them because he knew he was different. He just didn't want to be like out in the open about how different he was. He hadn't fully integrated all parts of himself into himself. Now, he also had shared with me that he felt nothing for the most part, except for the rare occasion that he felt something. But it wasn't really an emotion. It was more like a flicker, a curiosity, a flash of light in the darkness that was him, a brewing of excitement. But whatever it was mostly something to break up the monotony of his adult life, which he mostly viewed as missed opportunities to have been, or at least to have done more with. He had regrets. He felt he didn't have enough strength of character to be who he truly was and to be who he truly wanted to be, so he allowed himself to be who others wanted him to be. And that included a marriage, a house, and a baby on the way, which were all things he genuinely did not want, but knew he had to act like it was. So in essence, Scott killing Lacey and Connor was him killing the parts of himself he hated. It was the ordinary, the banal, and the normal parts. It was the parts that he hated about himself because it was the parts that he had to embrace, the normal parts that other people had, that he had to embrace so that he could hide out in the open and not appear to be too abnormal. Because he had delusions of grandeur. So the only way for him to become something other in himself than what he was, which was in his mind ordinary, was to kill it. And through their death and the death of the ordinary parts of himself, could he then become something out of the ordinary? Because this was not just murder. This was murdering his wife and murdering his unborn son, which goes against the basic fundamental tenets of human instincts to protect. And not only to protect the young and the defenseless, but to protect your own young and your own defenseless. So he went against the basic tenets of human instincts. Now, on an energetic level, this is what was going on. Scott killing Lacey was him snuffing out the good in the world. Because in the shadow of her light and in her inherent goodness was his dark and his genuine lack of good. Now, this is not like a conscious thought that Scott was having. This is not like he was thinking to himself, Lacey is so good and I'm living in her shadow, and in the shadow of her goodness, all I am confronted by is my lack of goodness. No, it doesn't work that way. There's conscious thoughts, there's subconscious thoughts, and then there's the energetics and the energy of what is being played out that we cannot see, yet are still comprising the three-dimensional reality of what we are actually seeing. Then there's also the soul spiritual component, which is coming next as well. So on a subconscious, energetic level, what Scott was actually doing was he was trying to extinguish the light that was Lacey, because it was starting to blind him. And it was starting to blind him through the choices that he was making, where he was energetically lowering his own vibration. And I'm going to gather up my crystals. This is the example I always give. I hope you're not bored of it yet, because this example is here to stay. So for anybody that is new to this concept, the way that vibration and energy works is as such. I am holding in my hand 2 crystals. Imagine these are not crystals, but they're magnets. Now, I can't even pretend to say that I understand the way that this works, only to share anecdotally that this is what I remember from my childhood. Holding 2 magnets. If they're turned the same way, to the same polarity, this is the way that they work. You move them in towards one another, they are attracted to, and they connect to one another. But if you take one of those magnets and you turn the magnet around, it is now facing a different polarity. And what will then happen is when you start to bring them in towards one another, they are repelled by one another. So as this one comes in, it pushes this one away. Comes in, pushes this one away. But if you take it and you turn it around this way, it's now facing the same polarity. They are drawn to and attracted to and connect to one another. That is exactly the same way that energy and vibration works. Like attracts like. So you want to know what kind of vibration somebody is transmitting, or what kind of vibration they are living in. Look at the experiences that are playing out around them, because that will tell you what they are attracting in and what they themselves are attracted to as well. Like attracts like. Look around. You will see what people are connecting to and what they are repelling. This is the same way that vibration and energetics works. So through the choices that Scott was making, he was in essence starting to lower his own vibration and was therefore no longer an energetic match for Lacey. But that wasn't enough. It's not just to say, well, they weren't an energetic match, so they ended up getting divorced, right? He's image conscious. He wasn't going to do that. Doesn't have to make sense to us. This is what was going on in his mind, right? Now, here's also the thing. Again, it wasn't just enough to kill Lacey and to kill Connor, because through the killing of them was he in essence killing the banal and ordinary parts of himself and of his life and the things that he himself despised. It didn't just end there. Because the way that he had killed Lacey was to depersonalize her. And I'm going to share what that means. And this is also a great example of how what is going on behind the veil is going to end up influencing the reality that we see playing out around us. Because this is what had happened. And it's a sensitive subject. I'm going to be very, try to be very sensitive with the way that I share the information. But the way that Scott had actually killed Lacey was that he had dismembered her body. She was not a whole body when she was discovered. Now, here's the thing. This was done because first and foremost, this was to evade detection of Lacey's body, right? Because he dismembered her body. He took the body to the docks and it was dismembered, so he had put it into bags. Now, if there was somebody at the docks that day and they were watching him, it would have aroused a lot less suspicion if he was seen not carrying like one big ass bag onto the boat, but if he was carrying, a couple of smaller size bags. Because then it's like, oh, well, he's just carrying his gear onto the boat. It arouses a lot less suspicion. But also, if the body is dismembered and it's not all whole, it's a lot harder to actually identify it. Because the hands are not on it. You can't get fingerprints. The head is not attached to it, so you can't get like the dental prints. You can't get the dental records. So this was, on a three-dimensional level, was done to evade detection. But what do we also know about the way that water works? It corrupts all evidence. So this was a 2-for-1 punch. Well, he's going to dismember the body. It's going to make it a lot harder for them to detect or identify who it is. But it's also so that way the water is going to corrupt any of the evidence that is discovered. But here's the thing. It's so much more meaningful behind the veil. This was also done to depersonalize her, and that is why he had chosen to do it this way. And why did he do it this way? It was done to completely drive out the light that Lacey was. Because he could have taken her body and buried her somewhere. He didn't. He wanted her body not to be discovered and not to be found. And he wanted all evidence of who she was to not be made identifiable to the remains that were discovered. This was an effort for him to completely eradicate Lacey's existence and to assure that not only would her body not be found, but if it was, it would not be identified. This was done to completely drive out the light that she was so that it could threaten his darkness no more. They were no longer an energetic match for one another. But Lacey's continued light was starting to blind him. And he couldn't see anymore. He couldn't see himself. He couldn't see the world. He just knew he had to eradicate the light and eradicate it for good. Similarly, too, this is why he had killed Connor, because there were certain things done to the fetus to assure that the fetus was going to die as well. He didn't just kill Lacey. He also there were certain actions taken to assure that Connor was going to die. This was also done to assure that no good would come from him either. As he was becoming more and more who he was, he couldn't even have goodness come from his own seed. He had to eradicate the light that was to be Connor as well. It was so massively energetically incongruent that he had to assure that his own seed would not survive. He was, through the choices that he was making and through his actions, was so committed to the dark that was him, he couldn't stand the thought that any light would come from him. All he knew was that he had to drown out that light and drown it out for good. Let's go back. So, energetically, he had to drown out the light that was Lacey and that was Connor, because he was embracing his dark through the choices that he was making. Now, on such a deep and fundamental level, why was he trying to drown out the light? Here's why. Through their death, he was reborn, and he became what he was always meant to be, in his opinion, different. So what was at play behind the veil is actually things that we can see playing out in cases like this all around the world. Familial side, where husbands are killing their wives. Why? Here's why. It is the denial of the divine feminine in favor of the basic expression of a woman's role. What does that mean? Lacey was on the precipice of embracing one of the ways that a woman can embrace her divine feminine, just one of the ways, but it was through her welcoming a child into the world, because women are portals. We bring through souls onto the earth plane. So as she was on the precipice of embracing her true expression of the divine feminine, this was massively triggering Scott. And why? Because Scott was out of alignment of his divine masculine. How do we know this? What is a full expression of the divine masculine? It's a man whose role is that of the protector and a provider for his family. But instead, Scott had eschewed his responsibilities of being the divine masculine in favor of the base objectification of women. How do we know this? He was having affairs. So because he was so completely out of alignment with his own divine masculine, and he was not living in the divine masculine, he was becoming triggered by Lacey on the precipice of her embracing her full divine feminine. And that is why he had to eradicate the light that was her. Because every time he looked at her, and he looked at her growing belly, and he knew that she was on the precipice of fully embodying her divine feminine, he became triggered because he was living so fundamentally out of alignment, and he could not stand the way that it made him feel. So he had to drive out the light that was Lacey, so he could then no longer be uncomfortable in his own energetic dysfunction. Now, Scott Peterson is not unfortunately unique, because again, prisons are full of men that have killed their wives. So he is here to shine a light on sick society, because he's a product of it. He is someone so fundamentally emasculated that his only way to feel like a man was to cheat on his wife, to kill her, and then to kill his own unborn son. So the lesson in all of us is for us to see that the cases that spark our collective attention is here to teach us something, should we just open our eyes. Now, on a soul and spiritual level, what was shown to me is that Scott and Lacey were not strangers to one another, because that's not the way that soul contracts work. I'm going to expand on that. But rather, these were two souls who had met, who had danced with other partners in other lifetimes, but were being reunited at the end of the dance to dance with one another once again. Now this is where I'm going to go back to what I had shared on this idea of familial side, uricide, and feticide. Feticide? Whatever it is. Okay. Now, how do you know that these two were not strangers to one another? And how do you know that the men that are killing their wives, a la Scott Peterson or a la a Chris Watts, how do we know that they're not strangers to one another? Here's why. 92% of women are killed by men they knew. So it's either an ex-husband, an ex-boyfriend, or an ex-lover, or a friend, or someone they just knew. 63% of those women were killed by their husbands or their boyfriends. So only 8% of women are killed by strangers. The other 92% of women are killed by someone they knew or they currently know at the time of their death. This is a demonstration in the three-dimensional of exactly the way that soul contracts work. because here's why. Imagine fibers on a rope. And every time you have a lifetime with someone and there's an accumulation of so-called karmic shit, or it's accumulation of things that need to be worked through with those two particular souls, like fibers on a rope, that rope will become stronger and thicker. It's like an accumulation of karmic shit through a collection of lifetimes, making that rope thicker. And when you are born into any particular family, that is an expression that you have unfinished karmic shit to work out with that family. Not all of it is bad necessarily. Think about like a pebble when it's thrown into water, it's creating ripples. Ripples can be good, ripples can be bad, even though those terms are an oversimplification. But ripples can be where there is a good level of karmic energy that is to be worked out. But it can also be where there is something that is energetically out of alignment between those souls. And that's why you are coming back into any particular incarnation into a family, and especially with the people that we choose to marry and have relationships with. Because the closer you are to somebody in any particular incarnation, that is an indication of the level of karmic shit that you still have to work through with them. Think about like your neighbor. Maybe you see them once in a while, you say hi, you say bye. You don't really have that much to do with them. So that's not somebody that you have karmic shit that you really have to work through. But the closer you are to the epicenter, so to speak, that is a reflection of karmic shit that still has to be worked out. So when we see statistics such as this, where 92% of women are killed by men they knew, that is the three-dimensional version of karmic shit being worked out in any particular incarnation. It is those souls coming together again at the end of a dance when they've danced with all of those other partners and they just want to have one last go, one last dance with that particular partner before they call it a day and they go home. This is karmic soul attachments and soul contracts. This statistic, 92%, that is it being played out in the three-dimensional world. So yes, on a soul and a spiritual level, Scott and Lacey were not strangers to one another, because that's not the way that soul contracts work. And if you want to know more about the way soul contracts work, I'm going to be releasing a video on that probably later this week. Now, Scott, once we started talking about this soul and spiritual stuff, Scott wanted to get in on the conversation, and this is what he had shared with me. He had been a lord, a conquistador, a conqueror, a man with influence and power who could have his pick of women. And thus, being settled down in this modern day life, his word bullshit, felt foreign to him. And this is not to say that he did not also have his fair share of banal previous incarnations. He just didn't want to acknowledge them. He didn't want to recognize that even in past lifetimes, he had been just a regular, everyday man. So he chose to ignore those incarnations, even when referencing them with me. He only wanted to be seen as special, distinct, and different. Now, Lacey, on the other hand, so first and foremost, Lacey did not come into me. Only at the very, very end did she start to come even a little bit. And here's why. She did not want the sum of her existence in this incarnation, known as Laci Peterson, to be one in which she was remembered as the woman that was murdered by her husband. So she came in only for a little bit, and to share with me that first and foremost, she too had had many ordinary lives, of which she was proud of. she didn't, she was proud of them. She didn't feel like she had to hide them. She didn't have delusions of grandeur like Scott did and was content to have a normal life, raising kids and loving them. She genuinely and truly looked forward to being a mom. And therefore, she is glad that she and Connor are together on the other side. Now, she also wanted to share with me that she's on the other side, right? So she has an elevated vantage point in seeing the way that all of these things work. So therefore, she thinks this whole business of having once had a body and not being in a body any longer is remarkable within itself. Because everyone perceives, anyone who's not like spiritually inclined, when we're here, we're perceiving like, oh, we die and that's it, YOLO, you only live once, like, let's make the most of it. No, so she wanted to actually share that this whole business of having bodies and not being in it is remarkable, but the strangest thing to her is now being on the other side, that her and Connor's bodies are elsewhere, and that to most people, that's the realest thing in the world. It's where the remains of Lacey are buried and where the fetus of Connor is buried. That to them is the most real thing in the world. But that to her, it's just a representation of who they were in this particular incarnation, where she had the name Laci Peterson and he was to be named Connor. But it's not even an accurate one, as what's buried there is just a body. And it's not an accurate representation of them because it's a fetus of Connor and he's already grown up on the other side. On the other side, there's 20-year-old Connor. He grew up. He's lived his life, or he's lived the expression of his soul. He hasn't lived it in the three-dimensional, he's lived it in the etheric and the spiritual realm. She also wanted me to know that while there is no ill will towards Scott, because that's not the way it works, on the other side there's nothing but love. All of the heavy, denser human emotions like judgment or jealousy or fear or hatred, none of that exists on the other side. It's nothing but love. So while there is no ill will towards Scott, she still will not be meeting him when he crosses over onto the other side, nor will Connor. She also shared that she understands they were just taking turns dancing in their various incarnations, and she's glad that they will not be together again, because this was her last incarnation as it was Connor's. And actually it was shown to me that Connor, his soul had volunteered to come in and to be with Lacey in this last incarnation, and here's why. Connor's soul had volunteered to come in to protect Lacey so she would not be alone, so that this, her last life, would end with him being her constant companion. He was, if you will, a guardian angel to love, comfort, and guide her as she bid farewell to the earth plane once and for all. So that is my read on Scott Peterson and Laci Peterson. Now, even though this is not channeled information, because Scott, being so image conscious, would not actually share with me the actual killing, this is where I'm going to be sharing my 2% personal opinion on what I believe to have happened. Now, this is also based on the energy. So I'm going to share with you what the energy had expressed to me, which was that Lacey was not conscious at the time that she left the house with Scott that day on December 24th. So she had gone out that morning to walk the dog, and then she had come back. And because here's the thing, at that point, her energy, her energetic vibrational blueprint was no longer conscious. So I believe that she was either unconscious at the point that she was taken out of the house that morning, or she was actually already deceased. And I believe that she was knocked unconscious, or she was killed in the house, and then her body was taken out to the car. Now, what was also shown to me in the energy of this is that Scott had taken Lacey's body to some wooded area not far from the bay in which he had gone fishing in. And once he was there, he had taken her out and he had dismembered her body, and then he had packed it up into bags, and then he had gone straight to the, I guess where his boat was, because he had a boat. Now, I'm also going to share with you that Scott's had said to the police that Lacey's things had not been touched in the house. And here's the thing. Her stuff had not been touched and it had been left where she left it, because if she was not conscious and she was not awake and she didn't think she was going someplace with Scott, there was no reason for her to take her stuff. She didn't take her bag, she didn't take her phone, she didn't take her keys. They were all left where they were because she didn't consciously leave the house, right? Like if you leave your house to run errands or even to like go with somebody and be a passenger in a car, you're taking your stuff with you. She wasn't conscious, there was no need for it. It wasn't like it was taken and then he put it back. No, it was exactly where she had left it because she was not taken from the house consciously. But if there's one thing that we can take away in all of this, in the stories that capture our attention on a big scale or on a national scale, is that this is an expression of a soul contract being played out. Because again, statistically, the number of women that are actually killed by a complete stranger is very relatively small. It's 8%. All homicides, 92% of all homicides are by somebody that the victim knew. And of that 92%, 63% is a husband or a boyfriend. The other 30% or so is like an ex-husband, an ex-boyfriend, an ex-lover, an ex-partner, or a friend. That is the representation in the 3D of soul contracts working. It is souls coming together in any particular incarnation to work through their karmic shit. So as always, guys, I hope that you have found this video to be interesting and informative, perhaps even thought-provoking. And take what resonates, leave the rest behind, and as always, thinking about those magnets and the polarity, stay in the high vibration. So that way you can continue to attract positive people into your life, positive experiences into your life, and positive vibrations into your life. Until next time, stay in the high vibration.